number one belief is that you can accomplish anything you set your mind down to. And number two, if you want it, you got to work hard for it. So I think it's a combination of those two things that once I set my eyes on something, I'm like, okay, that's going to happen no matter what.
Hi everyone, I'm your host Rohit Bhargava and you are listening to episode 205 of the Startup Playbook podcast, a weekly series where I sit down with successful tech founders, investors and operators to unpack their journey, lessons and insights to help current and future entrepreneurs. The voice that you heard a little bit earlier was that of our guest for this episode, Damir Cuca. From tinkering with toys and electronics and migrating to Australia as a child without knowing the language, to eventually going on to launch and exit two successful businesses, Damir's career has been a masterclass in determination, resilience, and growth. He is best known as the founder and CEO of Basiq, an open banking platform that offers secure access to consumer financial data. Basiq went on to raise several funding rounds from top-tier strategic investors such as Salesforce Ventures, NAB Ventures, and Westpac's Reinventure group, before eventually being acquired by payments giant Cuscal in 2023. In this episode, Damir opens up about how to design a company culture that thrives on competitiveness and performance, what the process of acquisition looks like and what it meant for him personally, how he balances having an ambitious career with being a husband and a father to 6 children, and much more. Without further ado, here is my interview with Damir Cuca. Hi Damir, welcome to the Startup Playbook podcast and thanks so much for taking the time to be on the show today.
Absolute pleasure. Looking forward to the conversation.
Me too. I'm really looking forward to this one. But Damir, for those people that may not be as familiar with you and your background, you want to share a little bit about your story and what got you here today?
This story is quite long, so let me try and make it succinct as fast as possible. So, serial kind of entrepreneur. I think I was employed full-time for 4 years of my life. And since then, I've just been running my own business. I just recently sold my second business and kind of planning and scheming on the third one.
Love it. Very, very humble in terms of what you've kind of achieved to date. But obviously we'll get into your two businesses. But we were just talking about this before we turned on the microphone. You know, I think one of my favorite parts of doing these interviews is the research calls that I do prior to each episode. So hear these wonderful things about the guests, but also there's a lot of very common, sort of common traits that come up. And I think one of the big things that came up about you was just your sense of determination. Obviously, we'll kind of dive into some of the specific stories, but, again, something that your wife mentioned as well was even in high school when you guys met, your determination, even at that point, and, ambition was kind of quite evident. I imagine a large chunk of that probably comes from your childhood.
Yeah, look, I by the way, I always laugh when I hear the word determination because it's one of those words it could be easily translated by stubbornness, which is not always a good trait. Yeah, look, I think it's I think the determination comes from some of the kind of fundamental beliefs that I have. Number one belief is that you can accomplish anything you set your mind down to. And number two, if you want it, you got to work hard for it. So I think it's a combination of those two things that once I set my mind on something, I'm like, okay, that's what I'm going to do. And I just have to work really hard to make sure that I get there. And I'm not someone who kind of tries to find excuses in life or looks for reasons why something can't work out. I'm always like, at the end of the day, I'll hold myself accountable for everything. So if I want it to work, I can make it work. If I don't put in the effort, I don't want it to work, then it won't work. So I think it's a combination of that kind of fundamental belief that once I set my eyes on something, I'm like, okay, that's going to happen no matter what.
Do you think that traits like that are ingrained traits, or do you think that that's kind of like absorbed a little bit by your environment?
That's a good thing. Look, I think it's like, I like to believe that every human has it in them to be able to kind of be determined and accomplish what they do. And deep down, we all do. There's absolutely no reason why nobody can. But I think that the environment definitely helps shape in terms of how much energy, how much you apply yourself to, how relentless you are towards something. And I think for me, kind of personally, my background definitely has helped kind of give me that determination and give me that kind of thing of belief that, anything's possible, you just got to work hard for it. And so, to me, if I think about launching a new business, if I think about accomplishing the impossible, nothing feels impossible. It's just a question of how hard you want to work to be able to get to where you want to.
Yeah, it's interesting because I know Rowan, who I know you know quite well, and who's also someone I
Yes.
spoke to as part of the research process of the interview. One of the things that we spoke about when I did an interview with him was just like similarities for us from coming from an immigrant background and what that kind of meant in terms of just both, the type of life that we'd sort of seen growing up, but also having to adapt and having to do all those sort of things. Like I think you just kind of naturally sort of develop a lot of those sort of traits from, a previous conversation
Yeah.
you and I have had as well. Like I know you kind of told me that, when you sort of moved from, I think it was Yugoslavia to Australia, you were having to learn English at that point in time as well. And you were kind of like thrown into the deep end in school. There was no sort of ESL classes. I imagine even
No,
things like
correct.
that are just really, really sort of, at that kind of young age, having to like adapt and learn very quickly on the fly are kind of like, skills that you sort of take with you through life as well.
Yeah, look, I think it's like, if you kind of think about some of those elements that have kind of helped shape me, one of the things I kind of realize more and more, and I've got quite a few kids, I think that's the other thing that I'm kind of well known for is that I've got six kids. When they were all born, we had six under the age of seven, so definitely a handful. But what I kind of have kind of come to realize is this kind of concept of relativity, and relativity towards complexity and difficulties in life. Like my kids live in a nice environment. They're significantly more fortunate than what I was. And I look at their peers and they also kind of live in a similar kind of environment. And I find it comical when I listen to them and hear what their problems are. What they're kind of, what they're kind of upset about and stuff like that. What they're upset about, what they kind of come across, I didn't even kind of dream about when I was a kid because didn't even know that it was possible, that it was an actual concept. So for me and my parents couldn't afford a car. We lived in Yugoslavia at the time. We lived in a basement with three other families. There was one bathroom, one kitchen. We had to make do. Both my parents didn't have the opportunity to finish school. They had to kind of, started off in primary school, had to leave, go work on the farm because they come from rural areas, and then met in the city. And it was just like struggle the whole time, right? And once you kind of know what that kind of rock bottom is, then everything looks great and easy from the top. But if I look at kind of my kids, that fortunately they don't have to experience that. So the level that they enter in is kind of like this level of comfort. But then the moment they kind of dip underneath that, or which is still comfort to the majority of the world, they think it's the end of the world. So I think kind of at a macro level, being aware that I think if any kind of human can kind of make themselves be aware that things are just kind of relatively hard to circumstances. But if you really want to try and get to the definition of hard, there's many more people that are much more unfortunate and different kind of circumstances. So kind of comes down to appreciating and kind of realizing that the environment you're in is quite fortunate and anything's possible. So, the whole kind of concept of I'm going to start a business is going to be hard, or I'm going to do this is going to be hard. It's not hard. So you just have to be willing to kind of work hard for it.
Yeah. Another story that your wife Elizabeth mentioned to me was, I believe from a young age, even when you were 5, you sort of started pulling apart toys and kind of trying to understand how they all worked. And from what I understand, you had your first job when you were 13, 14 years of
Yeah, I
age.
think it was like, I can't remember, it was like something like 12, 13.
Yeah.
By the way, since I had my first job, I had always been employed. I've never had a time when I wasn't employed. So
Yeah.
yeah, so working at school. So while I was at school and kind of working, I think I did like 6 or 7 different jobs along the way. Ended up in a electronics factory as well, working on a production line, soldering optical fiber modems. Then kind of this is all while I was going to high school, and then I loved electronics so much. I ended up going to TAFE to get a certificate in electronics so I could become a tester. And so I was kind of, instead of putting the items together, I was actually validating, testing, and putting the oscilloscope onto it and all this other stuff as well. So, and I remember my favorite toys as a kid were, there was this mechanical lock that was just kind of, it was just determined to kind of break it open and see how it worked and functioned. One consequence of being a curious child interested more in how things worked was, when I was a kid, my auntie saved up her entire salary to buy me a birthday gift, and it was a car that you could control through an actual device. The problem with it was that it was actually wired to the car itself. and I wanted a remote control car. So what did I do? First day I got the scissors and chopped off the wire, and
Oh,
then I
wow.
realized it didn't work. So then I spent most of the weeks hiding underneath my bed and trying to work out how to actually fix it to get it back to function again. So curious mind.
Curious mind, yeah. And from what your wife Elizabeth was telling me, you sort of were on this path of kind of following more what she described as like a blue collar sort of career, probably similar in line with your parents. And it wasn't until, you had that kind of job on the production line that they told you that actually you might be interested to go down the software engineering path and those sort of things.
Yeah, it was. It's a really interesting story. Again, kind of. So I loved electronics, and in Australia when I was kind of entering kind of teenagehood, my parents couldn't park their car in the garage anymore because they converted to a full electronic lab. So I used to have my own circuit boards. I used to buy silicon chip magazines, get all the circuits from it, had a full etching kit, everything. Instead of buying pre-built circuit boards, I get like raw copper and kind of make them myself from scratch and everything. So I was adamant about this. Hence the reason why I love working at that plant and kind of made my way as a tester. And there was a whole group of engineers that worked, the electronic engineers that were kind of responsible for designing these optical fiber modems and so forth. And I remember coming to work once, and they asked me to come to the meeting room, and they've never been invited to meeting rooms. Just during school holidays, I'm there every single day. While I'm at school, I'm there kind of after school and that kind of stuff. And it was an intervention. So there's all kind of 6 engineers in there. And they said, hey, give me a sit down. I'm like, they're like, hey, we've been talking about you and your future career and what you want to do. And they're like, so you sure you want to do electronic engineering? I'm like, yeah, man, of course I want to do it. I want to be like you guys. This is great. I love electronics. And they said, look, we've been talking about it. We don't think it's a good idea. And I'm like, wow. And it wasn't that my passion wasn't there or the skills weren't there. It was the fact that what they kind of said is like, look, the field is evolving. Electronic engineering, most of the design work is done offshore. There isn't a big role in Australia for that kind of stuff. And really what you should be focusing on at the time, and this was still kind of relatively new, the computers element, they said is like programming. Programming is when you need to kind of focus on. That's the future of technology. And even though I could program, I never kind of saw it as a serious thing. I thought it was just kind of like something you play around with. It just didn't feel as serious as kind of building and constructing something that actually kind of make the lights turn on or move or whatever. But one thing that kind of dawned on me and I learned then, and I've had a couple of situations like that in life, is like sometimes you don't question stuff. Sometimes you don't need to. Sometimes you just shut up and listen. And that was definitely one of those moments where just shut up and listen. These guys are like gods to me, and this is what they're saying. They must be right. Like, how can they be wrong when I kind of look up to them? And it was that kind of moment that kind of like pivotal, and I said, okay, I'm going to do software engineering, so electronic engineering. And I started kind of taking the programming a lot more serious at that time. So yeah, and fast forward, here I am.
Yeah. And I guess fast forwarding to your first business, what was the catalyst for you sort of jumping out and doing your own thing? I think you kind of mentioned that you sort of realized that you didn't want to, like, you didn't enjoy being employed necessarily,
Yeah.
but I guess what was the kind of idea and the catalyst behind the first company?
Look, I think even though I had a long track record of working, by the time I got my kind of first official job out of college, I ended up, it was in 99, I think it was 99 or 2000. I ended up getting the job, and it was in the middle of .com era. So worked for this startup. I was employee number 7. Like all the startups in that crazy time, we went to, I think, 60 employees in the space of a year. It was just nuts. Somehow through that, they realized that I was a really good programmer, and they kind of gave me a team, and all of a sudden I'm a team lead. Kind of I've got these 6 people I'm kind of responsible for delivering these projects, and it was definitely an interesting time. I remember working in the office and sometimes sleeping there. We'd work until 3 o'clock in the morning, sometimes on some pretty heavy projects. But I didn't care. I was kind of like doing what I loved, and I was learning a lot. But I learned all the stuff of what not to do as well, because it was just a crazy time. I remember once I came to work and I'm like, why is everybody lined up outside of the boss's office? And they're all just kind of like getting made redundant. and they actually kept me, but my whole team was gone. So that was kind of interesting. And then after that, I left to go work for, I guess, what you'd call kind of a corporate kind of type job, working for an offshoot of Lion Nathan. They ended up buying a software development company and worked for them for 2 years. And it just didn't feel right. Like, not every task was possible. Everything was easy, kind of, nothing that felt kind of challenging. But I didn't like the fact that I didn't have the sense of freedom. I wanted to do it my way. I wanted to do it at a much more grander scale. And after that, I did 9 months of contracting, just to kind of, it was well paid at the time, get some kind of capital. And based on that, I decided to start my first business. And the big motivation behind that was freedom. And I wanted to do it better. I wanted to write software my way, design things my way, and so forth. So that was a catalyst for the actual first business.
And what was that journey like? Because I believe you were running that business for about 11 years before eventually exiting.
Yeah, correct. So that was interesting. So it was a professional service business. It's not like I had this problem, business problem or some kind of consumer problem that I wanted to solve. To be honest, all I wanted to do was just write better software than anybody else. And at the time, professional services was quite big. And if you had a software project, you go hire a software house and they'd come build it for you. So we were effectively guns for hire. So that was really interesting as a journey because I had fundamentally a strong engineering background, but I didn't have any of the other skills as well. So, as I kind of got into the field and we started getting kind of bigger projects, the first thing that kind of dawned on me is like, hey, what do I know about business? So I went to UTS to do a master's in business. So I thought I'd kind of build the skills that way. And then when I kind of finished that, then the other thing was like UX was a big deal. So I continued with my studies as well while I was kind of running the business and went to do a master's in design computing at Sydney Uni as well. So I felt like if I'm going to do business, I'm going to be the best at business. If I'm going to do UX, I have to strive to be the best at that. So that was kind of an interesting kind of journey because what I learned from it is like with any kind of business, it starts off with a really small kind of containable kind of element, but as things get complex, you need to adapt and learn new skills. And you have to be willing to kind of throw yourself at them and try and, even though you're not the expert, try and become an expert. And I think what that makes a really good kind of entrepreneur and a business person, someone who's more than happy to kind of dive into the unknown and learn and master that and kind of progress forward. So it's always been my kind of philosophy and something that I like is kind of going to the deep and the unknown.
Yeah. I love that. It's interesting because when I spoke to Roland for this interview, one of the things that he mentioned as your superpower was just your ability to, like, this very rare trait of being able to be very technical but being very commercial and business oriented at the same time. So someone who can speak both sides of the table. And it's interesting that you kind of mentioned that was a learned trait, because I think a lot of the time we sort of assume that these are just ingrained skills. So someone's either naturally born to understand things commercially and be able to sell well. What did that sort of process of learning, or what were some of the things that you kind of like learned through your masters or specifically through your business that, have kind of helped you develop in that area?
Look, I think in that area, I think that kind of ability, in what I've seen even for people that have worked with me as well, is that the people that can articulate their level of field or wherever kind of thing that they're in a very, easy to understand way are typically people that have mastered their field or that are really, really good at what they do or really passionate by it. And I think it's like, if I think about from an engineering perspective, something that I'm quite kind of passionate about is, I kind of, it's all I live and breathe for. So kind of you get to a kind of level where like, okay, I know I'm in the world of kind of technical. I don't expect everyone to understand that. And then when you kind of engage with other people, you try and work out, well, how do I distill it to the core kind of elements so I can communicate that kind of more succinctly, as opposed to kind of launching him and showing diagrams of systems and databases and trying to kind of work all this stuff out. So, and I think it's an important skill to have. Like we had this one financial analyst that worked for me. He has this natural ability to be able to get into the most complicated spreadsheets and numbers and so forth. And I could point him to any process or any kind of problem, and he'll absorb all of it and distill it into 3 or 2 maybe PowerPoint slides, and we'll say, here's the problem. And here's what the numbers are saying in a really easy way. And I think I think it's an important skill to have, and I think that I have to kind of appreciate that the depth or complexity of every field is quite deep, and you don't expect everyone to understand that.
I guess for people that are maybe at the start of their journey of kind of like really understanding, like let's say sales, for example, do you have any advice for founders who are potentially in that boat that are potentially technical or again, are just kind of like learning the ropes with sales in terms of what are key things that have helped you develop in that area, or just advice that you have for founders in that space?
It's funny because sales was also something that I didn't have as a skill. It's not like I worked as a AE or BDR or SDR. And when I launched Basiq, the second business, it was definitely because it was a product platform-based business. I had to have a much more stronger sales approach, whereas the professional service one's more consultative. You're kind of selling your capabilities. And so, approaching that, I also had to kind of tackle it in, well, what the heck do I know about this? How do I kind of approach it? And my method that I've kind of found works quite well is that whether it's for software development engineering, whereas for any kind of processes, is to start off with a predefined framework, and you kind of find a framework that's already been proven, something that's out there that's quite prescriptive, and you have to follow it to the T. You have to follow it to the T, and only just to give it the time so you can kind of understand and appreciate for what it was designed to do. And I think once you kind of do that, what happens, the next step after it is that you start to adjust it. You start to kind of adjust it for yourself. You're like, now I understand the continuity, I understand how the framework works. And you start to kind of adopt bit by bit. And the best frameworks will come out, the ones that feel natural, the ones that you don't have to kind of go to a book to kind of look up, and it just kind of things work. I've got this really interesting scenario of what happened to me. So in the first business, we were building software for other companies, and we got it to a stage where we did it exceptionally well, like, typically on schedule, great quality. It did what it was meant to do, happy customers, all of that. And that took a while. And then to get to that stage, when I started Basiq, I was like, I know how to do this. This is really kind of easy. So with the first kind of team that I hired, I remember they were overseas, and I was overseas with my family. And I was a big kind of believer in not using software for managing the workload, but actually using physical walls and boards and so forth. And I had, I kind of created these kind of agile cards, and on the agile cards, everybody had a sticker book with their avatar they can kind of stick on it to create a sense of responsibility. We had the appropriate swim lanes in there. And I was kind of teaching, I was like, this is the process we're going to use because it just works really well. I've done it for a long time. They're all quite skeptical when we kind of did all this. And I started kind of doing it bit by bit, and everyone started to kind of adapt to it. And then once we built the MVP, I flew back to Sydney, and I was like, asking them, I was like, how are we going? And what they started to do was to take photos of the actual board and email me the photos of the progress. And I realized that, okay, just because it worked before and it was a great system, these are different circumstances. It's not going to work anymore. So we had to adapt. So we had to kind of take a process that I knew kind of worked quite well and kind of move it to a different mechanism all the time. So what I mean by that is that just because something works for you and worked for you in the past doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to work in the next place where you go as well. So I think looking to master any kind of topic or process or new kind of venture, even though you've got the skills, you have to have kind of go into it with the mindset that you're going to have to adapt it as well going forward.
We're going to take a very quick break from this podcast to talk about one of our partners, Vanta. So if you're building a SaaS business and want to quickly unlock growth and build customer trust, one way to do this is by achieving compliance with SOC 2, ISO 27001, CPS 234, Essential 8, or other in-demand compliance frameworks. However, this process is often time-intensive and very costly. Vanta automates up to 90% of compliance, making you audit-ready quickly and saving you up to 85% of associated costs. And not only that, Vanta scales with your business. With a market-leading trust management platform to help you continuously monitor compliance, unify risk management, and streamline security reviews. You can join over 8,000 global companies like Atlassian, Dovetail, and Indebted that use Vanta to build trust and prove security in real time. As a listener of the show, you can get up to $1,000 US off Vanta when you head over to vanta.com/demo. All right, let's get back to the episode. I think kind of speaking to like lessons from your first business and going into Basiq and even your next company as well, I think one of the things that often gets overlooked is how much opportunity there is and how many sort of different kind of choices there are out there for people. And often the more kind of difficult task is determining what is the right business idea problem to sort of go after. Again, do you have any tips or kind of like frameworks of how you sort of distill ideas and problems to work out what is the right problem for you to focus on and go after?
I don't think there's necessarily right or wrong kind of problem. I think number one, it has to be something that you're passionate about, something that's close to you. I struggle to find examples or kind of even believe that someone will make something successful unless they genuinely are kind of bound to the problem that they're kind of trying to solve. And I think the most powerful element is when you can kind of think about it, when it's been a personal, individual problem, and then you realize that, okay, this is a really big pain, because a business requires so much effort that you need to have absolute conviction, absolute kind of belief in the problem that you're trying to solve, and have the desire to solve it, because it requires that energy to help you get over the bumps and the hurdles that you're going to face along the way. So I think that's kind of number one in terms of it. Now, once you've worked it out, then obviously you also need to kind of make sure that there's an appropriate market for it and that you're not the only individual in the whole world that has that particular problem. And it also kind of touches on something that I kind of advise other kind of people when they're launching and getting into a business, was not to focus on the solution, but to focus on the problem. And I know it sounds simple, but just the importance of it, because every solution you have until you've got at least X amount of users is just a hypothesis. So it's like, oh, you think it can be solved in that way, but you won't know until the first person starts to use it, until you start gathering that feedback, create that loop kind of going forward. So I always kind of say, like, your job is not about discovering what the right solution is. Your job is about kind of defining that problem in the most articulate and understanding way, like so well that you've looked at all the different dimensions of it and you can really kind of feel the pain. And I think once you've got that, then you've got something to work with. You can kind of put that on a pedestal and say, okay, that's a problem we're looking to solve. Now, what are the possible solutions? And that's where kind of the concepts of pivoting kind of come in, and they're perfectly fine as an instrument and a tool. You might say, I've got a hypothesis to build this solution, and then, you try it out, it's not working, I'm going to pivot, I'm going to try different ways until I kind of got it. And now people are like, yes, I want to use this. And really what they're saying is, like, you've understood the problem and you finally give them the tool to be able to solve it.
Again, do you have, like, when you kind of talk about really defining the problem, what does that sort of look like in action for you? So either when you sort of started Basiq or, with the new venture that you're working on, what does that sort of process look like for you?
The problem is, like, so one of the things, and I'll borrow something from an engineering perspective, is like, whenever you want to design some kind of software solution, the core kind of fundamental principles of any kind of architectural design is to look at it from different viewpoints. And I think problems has the same kind of concept as well. You put a problem stage in the center, but then your responsibility is to try and look at it from a different set of eyes. And a viewpoint could be, it could be looking at it from, if you identify a particular kind of market group or demographic who you think this applies to, you want to try and kind of group those people and then look at it from their eyes, try and put yourself in their shoes. How do they perceive the problem? What are the pain points that are kind of clear to them? So I think underlyingly, it's about really looking at it from many different perspectives to be able to try and kind of understand it. And really what you're trying to get to is a single sentence. A single sentence where you can say, this is the pain. And based on the single sentences, you'll have a whole bunch of kind of like bullet points, which are kind of sub-points or sub-problems that need to be kind of adhered to. Because that's ultimately, when you're building a software, it's what your responsibility is to deliver something to the world that solves someone's problems or makes something easier for someone because of X, Y, and Z. So it really is about kind of perspectives. And then once you've got that, then it's about solution validation, kind of getting out there as soon as possible, getting their feedback loop going and making sure you hit the nail on the head.
Yeah. And from what I understand, for the early days of Basiq, you actually moved your family to Serbia in winter.
Yes.
For the first, what was it, about 9 months?
Yeah, for about 9 months, correct. It was actually a little bit longer. It was 9 months that I was working on it, but we were there for I think it took us 3 months to settle. And
Yeah.
then I realized like with the settlement, I was like, I have to start this. Otherwise, like we'll just be settling for the next 2 years. So
Yeah, but from what again from what your wife Elizabeth was telling me, you had four kids at the time. Like packing
yes.
up your whole family around those sort of things to go after this is usually like a big ask. Why, like just out of curiosity, why did you feel like it was important to move at that time and kind of go all in that way?
Look, I think it's like I was looking for when I when I sold my first business, I was and main reason why I kind of exited was that I got sick of building software for other businesses and I wanted to kind of do something that I fundamentally believed in. I
Mm,
was kind of passionate. And to me, kind of the personal problem that I was looking to solve was around finance, having experience what it was like not to be in control of money and so forth. I wanted to kind of solve that problem, and I kind of and I think most of my businesses kind of going forward will always be about bridging the gap, between rich
mm,
and poor, and how do we leverage software to kind of democratize or make it easier or more accessible for people as well. And I was quite frustrated looking at from a financial perspective kind of realizing that in the world there's these people that are quite knowledgeable about finance and see it as an instrument towards creating more wealth. And then there were people that are in the struggling bucket to the ones that it's all about paycheck to paycheck, being able to pay off the bills and what do I do? And if you talk to those people about investment strategies or you talk to them about investment of properties or assets or crypto or whatever, they'd be like, what are you talking about? I just have to survive. And I fundamentally believe that software had the ability to bridge that gap,
mm,
considering that all the elements were there. Money had become digitized completely. So instead of, carrying physical cash in our pockets, it was all transactions in a database. And, we all became kind of familiar with using apps and smartphones and so forth as well. So I became incredibly frustrated as to every time I open up my banking application, I looked at it and I'm like, why is this not helping me? It understands where I'm spending. It understands the money that I'm receiving, where it's going. Why isn't it screaming at me and giving me the information and knowledge that I need? And that felt kind of like a very worthy kind of problem to solve because I figured if I could build this kind of super app that could provide financial advice, help people with budgeting, help them understand where their money's going, help them set their goals and help them towards that. I figured that'd be something worthwhile building, to help kind of people out.
mm,
And it was interesting kind of I went through the design process of that and I started to kind of design what this application would look like and how it would work. And the more I kind of went into it, the more I was like, why hasn't anyone built this already? Why isn't it out in the market? And that's when I hit the kind of brick wall. I identified that the reason why they can't build it is because the data is scattered everywhere. And there's no way to aggregate and bring that data into a single place. And unless you get that complete view, like it's impossible to provide recommendations because you need to be able to understand individual circumstances. And then that kind of like really kind of hurt me because I was thinking, well, I can't build this. I can't help people. Well, if I can't do it, nobody can. It must be really kind of hard. And then that was like the conviction, the light bulb. I was like, that's it. I have to build a platform that enables other software developers to be able to leverage this data to help people out. And it was with that kind of conviction that I kind of put my hand up, spoke to the family and say, how committed are you to this? Spoke to my wife and she said, let's do it. And
mm.
we did, we didn't, at the time we had twins that were 9 months old. We had a son that was 3 and another one that was 5. And there's a photo of us on the plane. I'm holding one twin, Elizabeth's holding the other twin, the other two on the plane. I'm going to Serbia where I hadn't been since I was 7. In a country I don't know from a business perspective how it's going to work, what it's going to work out, but I had this conviction. And the reason why I went there was I realized, I wanted the business to be kind of international and global, and I figured like time zone is going to be an issue no matter what. I might as well kind of bite the bullet. There's no doubt there was a huge cost element as well because I could get effectively free engineers for the price of one. And there was also, I guess, a third part was the cultural element that was kind of pulling me in as well. I figured like I could mix the personal and the business world a little bit and kind of get that satisfaction. But COVID kind of threw that out the window. So,
Mm.
and and then that was it. We got there. I didn't know anyone from a business element. I didn't know how to hire engineers over there. But so one of the things that I did was like immerse myself in the local IT community. They had a podcast. It's called IT Serbia, and I think I listened to every single episode. And there was this one episode where the guy said like, oh, we should all kind of, IT community in Serbia, we should all kind of hang out and so forth. And, if anybody wants to drink, just kind of hit me up. So I sent him an email saying, hey, I'm coming all the way from Australia to have that drink with you that you said on this episode. He thought I was full of crap. And then when we met, he goes, you seriously came from Australia to have a drink? Yeah, I did. He put me on the podcast. I had an opportunity to kind of explain what we were building, and that's how we hired our first engineers. So it was just kind of, and then got the engineers, got the office, kind of put together, focused on the MVP, and came back.
Yeah, and I think that kind of like piece of finding people that will sort of follow you on the mission and kind of like join you is really difficult. I did speak to two of your employees as well, Victor Leung and Jake Osborne, and Jake kind of mentioned that I think he was working at Salesforce at the time and sat in on a pitch that you did and was so impressed with your pitch that he like emailed you straight away asking if he could come and work for you. And I think within a few weeks he had quit his job and moved over to Basiq.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, look, I think it's look, you have to. I guess this is one of the advantages of working for a founder-led business is, you get to be, you get to kind of work for something. You get to be kind of closer to what the vision is and what the mission is of the actual company, and you hear it firsthand. Where somebody kind of tells you with passion what they want to do and why they want to do it, and all of a sudden you might be working for a 9-to-5 job, and you're like, oh my god, this has meaning, this has purpose. I want to be part of this journey. I want to kind of solve this as well, and it's fun as well. Like, when you're part of something that is being created from scratch and it's evolving and you're showing kind of validation, market and success as well. A lot of people would love to be part of the journey. And it would be kind of, I encourage anybody out there is whoever's kind of looking for that is, or looking to kind of build up their career and become really skillful is ultimately work for smaller businesses. And because you're going to be faced with so many different problems and areas of responsibility, it will make you definitely a much better, stronger all-rounder going forward.
Yeah, well, something that they both sort of mentioned in different ways was just, I think Victor put it as like you being very comfortable with ruffling feathers in an industry which is kind of like known for operating in a very particular way and being a little bit more sanitized, I guess, in terms of the way that they sort of communicate. So I guess from your perspective, and something that they both mentioned and I've heard separately as well, is that really kind of helped build the personality and kind of like the culture of Basiq in that way. But I guess like how much of that for you was a very intentional way of being able to sort of separate out and differentiate yourself in the market versus that just being like, I guess just you authentically just being you?
Look, I think it's a good question. There's two elements of it. One is I always kind of frame this question: if I was to take someone from the finance industry and tell them that, hey, we're going to go create these APIs that are going to provide access to people's financial data. I'm going to integrate with every single bank in Australia. And every developer in Australia would be able to use it and build applications on top of it. Like saying, this is never going to happen. Any kind of veteran in the finance industry would say that because they'll say, like regulation and this is hard and these banks won't work with you and they work slow and blah, 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 blah. So they'll have like 10,000 different excuses, which is why I also think that I genuinely believe that anyone looking to launch anything into an industry that they don't know as much about, that level of ignorance is literally bliss because you're not aware of all these kind of constraints. So everything is possible. So you're like, you're kind of like, well, why can't I do that? Like, so even for us kind of going into it, we kind of went into this thing, into the realm of, well, it's not possible to be able to actually do that. And that's one. And the second part is, for me personally, everything in life was always a fight. There's always like some kind of fight in there. You're fighting to buy a house, you're fighting to do this, you're fighting to kind of survive, you're fighting to blah, blah. So to me, it was always like, I always had to have some kind of opponent in the ring. And for me, that's also the way I kind of work as well, is like, I'm very selective with the opponent that I put in the ring because you got to be able to handle them Like it's, Jake Paul wouldn't be able to handle Mike Tyson in his prime.
Mm.
So for me, it was always like, okay, when we first kind of went out to business, like, well, who are we competing against? Who's the person that we have to, or the business or the entity or the industry we have to overcome? You put them in the ring and you work your ass off towards building that. And then kind of once you kind of done that, then the next you got to pick who's our next opponent, and I kind of do that. And I like to kind of orientate and work in that way. And then for us, it's like you just got to be relentless, whatever it takes. You got to kind of go in there, working within the realms of doing the right thing. I think it was even like when we were looking at kind of taking on finally our biggest kind of competitor, which at the time was Ilian, because they also had a service that was similar to ours and had a lot of this market that we wanted to kind of go after. I ended up creating a T-shirt for the team, and we put the word K in front of it. So we had hashtag Killian. We're like, we have to kind of win here. So for us, it was just kind of having that mentality, and then kind of like, when you have that, you can focus. And that focus is incredibly powerful because then you start to look at, okay, well, what's the market that they have access to? Okay, they've got these. Who are their customers? Why do the customers like them? Why do they not like them? Why are they still with them? How do we persuade them to come over to our platform? And the whole business starts to work around that, and you go for this kind of market grab because you're trying to increase. And I felt that kind of worked quite well. And, adds a bit of flair and a bit more kind of excitement to coming in every day. We even had a
Yeah.
scoreboard of like, how are we kind of going with that? Like, are we really kind of living up to it or not? So, yeah.
Yeah, which I imagine is such a galvanizing thing, like culturally for your team, and kind of getting a very clear expectation, but also putting everyone on your team in the same frame of mind in terms of what you're trying to achieve. I think Jake also mentioned that you guys had this thing called FinTech Fridays internally,
Yeah.
which was someone would sort of present everything that's kind of going on in fintech in the space. And one of the things that he mentioned was that on average, the amount of industry insight and intel that people had at Basiq, he's never seen across any other sort of company in that space. And that's a large part through the culture that was built internally.
Yeah, I had that in the organization, the first organization as well. Like my big thing is like about continuous learning. So I've always said like, if I've got a few weird traits. One of the traits that I've got is like I hardly ever look at people's CV. So it's kind of like when they give me a CV, I'm like, I'm not really interested. The thing that I'm always interested is the individual's aptitude to learn, particularly, because I'm always kind of working in these kind of growing businesses. So you need people who can kind of adopt and learn new skills. And, if you want to try a new strategy, how do you kind of learn? I don't need a one-trick pony. I need someone who really kind of is more than happy to jump in and kind of say, I'm going to kind of master that. So having that kind of element to that, the other thing that I believe about kind of continuous learning is like, it's the best form of career security that you can have. If you kind of strive to always learn about your field, you want to become the best at it. Even if you're made redundant, who cares? They'll have 10 companies lining up to hire you because you're great, and you're kind of renowned for that as well. So we always kind of looked at how do we kind of put that level of learning in it, and I figured if there's no point in me reading all these articles and being aware of what's happening if my team isn't, because I want all the ideas to flow from everybody else. So one of the things that we've always had at Basiq is this weekly session where we all get together and we'll do deep dives. We'll talk about industry. We'll talk about kind of what's happening, what the competitors are doing. We'll talk about, okay, well, how does this process work when somebody applies for a home loan? Let's all kind of educate ourselves. And it doesn't matter what field you're in, whether you're a software developer, a tester, you're in marketing or whatever, like everybody kind of knew really well. And that really helped because it transcends someone in sales that's looking at kind of working out who are potential customers. They understand the context better. All of a sudden the list grows from potential customers from this big to being that big because they realize the opportunities. People kind of come in and say, hey, have we thought about tackling this sector? This could be kind of value in there as well. Helps us evolve our product in the right way as well to be able to accommodate for that. So I think that's a really kind of important part, which I kind of generally believe in, and it's something I'll follow through forever.
Yeah, I think, and part of that growth is probably just understanding nuance as part of that as well. So something that Rowan mentioned was, I think he had a sort of conversation with you about, do you want to fight or do you want to win? And also, like, I imagine, like I've been in a situation as well of just being like a solo founder, and you're so used to, I guess, almost like doing everything yourself, it can be really hard to sort of let go particular components of that. So I'd just be curious in terms of like understanding stages for you of just understanding, when is the right time to fight, or for example, when is the right time to kind of like hold on to something versus when is the right time to let go or bring someone in, or those sort of things. Again, do you have any advice on how you sort of learn or kind of manage that for yourself?
Yeah, look, I think it's like it. I, I'll be honest, I was always bad at it. Like I'm always like I'm this. I've always been, well, was hopefully the person that's like, oh, I can just do this. I'll just go do it. Like, because
Mm,
I just need to kind of get it done. Or even worse, I'm like, I'm kind of thinking at an emotional level, like, oh, I don't want them to fail. I'll go and kind of do this for them so it's easier for them so they can succeed. And that was definitely at the beginning of the stage. And, some people might kind of transcend that, could call me a control freak or whatever. It wasn't about control. It was just like, I just didn't want them to fail. I was trying to
yeah.
do the right thing by them. And I think a part of that, you have this realization when you come to like a breaking point, and you realize you can't keep doing this because
Mm,
it's just too much. It's overwhelming, and then you kind of reflect. I remember one stage kind of looking back and saying, "If I continue like this business is going to fail. Like it's just not going to work anymore." And then you kind of start to delegate, and you have to kind of learn to actually do that. So fortunately, I had that earlier in the career where I learned that the hard way. And then as I did, I also kind of raised my kind of realization expectations when you hire someone, which is why it's important that they have the aptitude to learn, is you need to have those people around you, and you need to have the people that are kind of self-confident and can kind of go out and do that. And I
mm,
think we played that, really well. Like, Basic, I had our marketing person picked up, was phenomenal. He could execute really well. Finance did its kind of job exceptionally well. Software engineering, which was probably the harder one to let go, but I had to because the team was offshore. So I think that was all something that I learned. But one thing that I never let go of was the product element. So the product I kind of felt was really important that I had. As much
mm,
as people were trying to kind of get me, it's like, well, let go, you can't keep doing this. I was like, well, I have to because all the principles and all the things, and kind of to me, the value of what and the strength of the business was the product itself, and I still wanted to be part of it to the point where even the last days, any API interface change required at least to inform me before they actually did it, because I realized how it's one of those things that once you kind of put it out there, you can't kind of revoke it or come back.
mm.
And I wanted to make sure that it fit into the kind of grand scheme. So I think as a founder and as the business evolves, yeah, there's no doubt about it. You have to let go of a lot of things, and that's important. But there are some things you definitely have to hold on to, particularly the ones that really differentiate the business and ones that you believe you're providing value and it's kind of contributing to kind of the business kind of going forward in its unique position. And you see that a lot. Like even if you look at companies like Apple, you look at kind of their core, team, like Steve Jobs no longer around. You've got, some of the other main designers have gone as well. And you can see it's a business that's kind of starting to lose its direction in terms of, all the great things about it are no longer there. And some things are not making sense anymore. I think that's one of the kind of consequences of that.
Sender is the OG startup accounting firm in Australia, catering to all stages of your business life. If you're busy running a business, you don't always have the time to do your own books and forecasts, and instead you can fully outsource your finance function so that you have the time and resources back to do what you do best, which is growing your business. They have a dedicated focus on founders, funds, and startups, and have an experienced team that can help you with everything from managing your tax to balancing your books to even helping with your exit strategy. I trust and use them with all of my businesses and can't recommend them highly enough. To find out more or to speak to Gareth and the team, head over to sender.com. All right, let's get back to this episode. And from what I understand, obviously you were acquired by Cuscal in 2022. Is that
Yes,
right?
or 20,
Yeah,
23.
23. And from what I understand, that was not what you were intending to do. You were intending to sort of raise your Series B at that time, and it kind of just, the opportunity sort of came out to you. So, and again, I think in the Australian ecosystem in particular, some parts of the exits aren't really discussed. So I'm just really curious, how did the sort of conversations first come about, and what did that sort of process look like for you?
Yeah, so I've always had a bit of a different kind of approach of raising capital, in the sense that I remember the first time I kind of realized I was going to go on this path journey of, raising kind of capital, I felt incredibly uncomfortable about it. I just, in my world, it was kind of like you don't go out asking for or begging for money. It just doesn't kind of happen. So I think, and I always kind of felt queasy about like asking for someone because like, how do they, I believe in this element of trust, and anything I do, I kind of take it on heart and I'm going to do this. So even when I was about to go on my kind of, when I launched the business, just before I was even ready, because I was using my own kind of capital money that I had from the sale of the previous business, I actually went and spoke to a few potential investors. And my intention wasn't to raise capital. My intention was just to meet them and tell them about the journey that I'm about to go on. And some of the conversations would be kind of uncomfortable. I remember one where they're like, well, how much are you looking to raise? And I'm like, oh, I'm not raising. And I'm like, why are you here? And I was like, well, I just want to meet you. I want to tell you about it. I want to keep you on the actual journey. So one of the things I ended up doing is like I ended up creating this newsletter where I would keep the investors informed of my progress. I was like, hey, I'm about to go to Serbia to create an offshore team. And all of a sudden, then kind of subsequently, I send newsletters saying, hey, I've done that. And then I'd be like, hey, we're about to build an MVP. And I'm like, I've done that. Hey, we're about to get our first customer. I've done that. And what I did along the way was build this kind of relationship and rapport with them as well. And that helped. And then when I had to kind of raise capital, I was like, hey, I'm ready to raise. And I'm like, Damir, we're here. We believe in you. We know you're kind of good for it. We know you're going to work hard for it, all that kind of stuff as well. So that really kind of helped. And one of the things that I kind of realized is that my relationship with investors was always about, I was also kind of selective about the investors that were brought on. I figured I don't just want your money, I also want other elements. And I think that's really important. So all of the investors that we had some kind of strategic reason for their existence, to become a part of it. So for us, it would be, will you help me with the distribution of the product? Will you help me with getting more customers, increasing my market share? Give me some kind of unique partnership capability, or give me some future capability that I don't have yet, but I know I'll need tomorrow. So when I went out, I think we scheduled for our Series B capital raise, and I kind of looked at, okay, well, strategically, what are we getting into? And I realized there was this trend in the market where in the past, if you're a financial data company, then that's all you did. If you're a payments company, that's all you did. If you're an identity company, that's all you did. And I realized there's this kind of convergence of things kind of coming together where businesses that were using our service would typically get to work with 3 or 4 different providers, like a identity provider, a payment provider, data provider, and they have to kind of glue everything together. And you can see that the market was evolving to say that, okay, well, they don't want to keep doing that anymore. They want to be able to buy from one business and they want it to be integrated. And kind of seeing that, I was like, okay, well, we're going to have to get into payments. It's inevitable. We kind of started scratching the surface of, well, who we're going to go to market to. Cuscal's, the leading white label payments infrastructure that I think powers probably well over 90% of the actual fintechs in the market. And I realized, okay, well, if I had this strategic relationship with them, think about all the payment capability and unique and how strong we're in the market would be as well. So we know a few different providers that were in the payment space, quite big in the space. And I figured they could kind of give us not only the capital that we needed, but also that extra element. And the conversations all kind of changed with, I was like, after say raising capital, and the next one was like, would you consider acquisition? And I learned in business and from some other people as well, there's this kind of like, I believe in these kind of market forces, like market kind of goes through these waves. And when these market forces act, you don't want to go against the current. You want to kind of go with it. And I figured that if everybody's asking to acquire, then it's time to sell. So there was no kind of like, I wasn't kind of fed up with it. I was passionate about it. I wasn't looking for kind of an exit because I was looking to do something else. I just figured the market kind of came to us. So similar to the story we spoke earlier when those engineers brought me into a room and was, I said to myself, just shut up and listen. It was the same thing. I had the same feeling. I was like, okay, the market wants to buy. It's time to sell. Kind of came back to the team. It's like, hey guys, I don't think it's going to be a capital raise. I think we're going to be selling the actual business. Spoke to the board and we were all kind of like, well, if so many people are interested in it and want to acquire it, then it must be the right time to sell. So we kind of went along with that in a very natural way. And, we're quite kind of fortunate that we were able to have Cuscal as the business that acquired Basiq.
Yeah. And what does, from a personal perspective, what does that look like post acquisition? So, for almost a decade, you're kind of like working and building on this vision, and I'm sure there's still more things that you wanted to sort of achieve with the
Yeah.
company as well. What does that look and feel like on the other side of an exit and checks kind of landing and those sort of things?
That's a really good question, and I can tell you that. So I had this, and I think as a founder, you always have this concept of like, I'm going to build this business up and I'm going to sell it. And when I sell it, I think confetti is going to fall from the sky and it's going to be this like, like insane feeling and it's going to be great or whatever. And having spoken to a few other founders that had a good, successful exit, I can tell you that it's not the case. It was actually the opposite. It was like an element of, I'm not going to use the word depression, but kind of being sad, right? Like I was actually sad that I kind of sold it. I remember kind of doing the final signature. I was like, man, it's like, do I have to do this? Like, it's like the market's decided you've gotten this far. And I was like, and when I signed that, I wasn't happy. I was actually quite sad. So, and even when the money kind of hit the account, I remember coming home, money kind of landed and kind of coming to the family. And I was like, there wasn't this kind of jubilee or anything. It was just like, my wife's like, all right, cool. Stuff's in the kitchen. Can you go clean up? One of the kids kind of drops something. I think like they drop something on the floor. All of a sudden, I'm on the floor kind of scrubbing stuff. I'm like, got all these extra zeros, but it didn't do anything. And I kind of, the strange thing about that is that I had to kind of question who I was and what the hell was this about? Did I fool myself the whole time? Like, what is really the purpose? Why am I doing this? And I came to a realization that it really is, it's the joy of kind of building, and it's the joy of the journey, and it's the joy of those micro accomplishments along the way. And when the journey ends, and then it becomes really hard. It's actually not kind of great from that point of view. Hence why I'm kind of fortunate that I still consider myself young, or younger. So I'm kind of thinking about, okay, well, I'm going to do this again because this is what I love doing. And when I talk to other people, they're like, you want to go work and go crazy and go stress and pressure. I'm like, yeah, man, like I love that. So I can't wait.
It's hard once you kind of hooked to it. It's hard to kind of take yourself off the drug.
Yeah, correct. Like it's fun. Like if my kind of, if we kind of just digress, something that I'm quite adamant about teaching my kids is like I give them these. I've always said like I've got these three kind of principles that I keep kind of telling them. And it's my kind of advice for them for now and the future. I've always said like, number one, you have to find something that you love. You have to do something that you love. It's like the most important thing. And it doesn't matter what it is, but it has to be something that you love, that you're passionate about. Number two, once you found that, you need to be the best at it, like, or strive to be the best. And I don't mean the best within your little cohort of, within your team or whatever, but be the best in the world at it. Like, do whatever is required, which shouldn't be hard if you're doing something that you love. And number three is be a good human being. So don't kind of have accomplishment of by stepping on other people or doing the kind of wrong thing as well. And I kind of feel like for me, it's just kind of three elements that are what I would kind of say is the three kind of elements of success that you need once you kind of have that. So for me, it's like all three of those things are applied to the actual business. Like it's something that I love doing, it's something that I'm passionate about, something that I strive to be the best at. And then, I take pride in going to sleep at night, closing my eyes, knowing I haven't done anything wrong as well. So that's why I guess it's kind of hard when when that baby's gone. And I imagine I'll probably have the same feeling when the kids start to leave home as well. So
Yeah. And speaking of your kids, it's again something that I've spoken to a few people that I've had on the podcast off the record about, particularly when they have kids and, particularly when they've come from more difficult and challenging upbringings, and kind of talking about how a lot of that's kind of shaped their drive and motivation and ambition. And I guess kind of maybe fears is too strong of a word, but just kind of understanding that that their kids kind of will grow up in a very different environment, like you were kind of referencing earlier. So I'm wondering, in terms of for you, like what does that sort of look like in terms of trying to create? Obviously, there's a lot kind of spoken about company culture and those sort of things, but I'm trying to understand from your perspective, how do you sort of think about that from like a family perspective, and how you sort of think about raising kids to do that so that they're not almost disadvantaged from the comfort and those sort of things that they'll be raised in.
Yeah, look, I think it's like the number one thing is you have to lead by example. I think that's kind of really important. So I think kids witnessing me kind of building a business, and soon I'm going to be kind of focusing on my next kind of venture, and they'll see this journey once again, and I kind of get them included and absorbed. I had my kids kind of come into meetings in previous businesses to kind of understand how that works and stuff like that as well. I think it's kind of important. The second part is I've told all of them, and kind of we're executing on this, is that the moment you start high school, you're going to get a job. So just the same as I did. And I kind of feel like that creates a sense of responsibility, creates a sense of accountability as well, and it teaches them all this really kind of important skills. So there is no way in the world that I will ever kind of cradle them as kind of like teenagers and think that they're going to, everything's just easy and that kind of stuff as well. So I think that's important. Like, you have to put kids in uncomfortable circumstances so they can kind of learn from that as well. So I'm kind of really big on that, and it's a little bit counter to the culture that we're experiencing at the moment, where kids are a lot more kind of cradled, a lot more kind of bubble wrapped these days, because there's there's pedophiles everywhere. You can't kind of send them out because something bad will happen to them. Don't let them go on a bike because they might hit by a car, all this other stuff as well. But you need to kind of look at the danger of, what if you don't? What if they are just at home? What if you just kind of cradle them all their life? They're going to grow up to be, this kind of what I call kind of like child adults, so to speak, where, they don't know what to do. And I think the part that kind of scares me the most is that they won't know what their purpose is, or they won't know what to do. And I kind of feel like that's just going to waste the time for them to do something great as well. So look, I would say one of the things with parenting these days, particularly in this kind of high tech world and kind of where we are right now, it's incredibly complicated. I think way more complicated than what it felt like when I was a kid, because you've got so many kind of things that you mustn't do, and all the kind of things that we thought was the right thing is now kind of being questioned as to, well, should you really be letting them out at that age, or should you really be allowing that? But the problem is, if you don't kind of let them go, they'll never learn. So, and what are the consequences of that?
Yeah. Yeah. And in terms of kind of setting that example, clearly you're sort of very ambitious and driven with work, but that's kind of balanced with, as again, your wife sort of pointed out, you're extremely dedicated to your family as well. What does that balance look like for you, or what are kind of like habits or things that you have to be able to achieve everything that you want to achieve with work, but then also kind of be able to do the things that you want with your family?
Yeah, look, it's like you have to kind of take the decisions that you made, and you have to be kind of see them through to the end. I would see it as completely irresponsible for me to have brought so many kids into the world and then kind of neglect them because I'm doing something that that I want to kind of do. And I think that that's not fair on them, and that's not very responsible either. So, one of the habits that we've got is, and Elizabeth's very kind of big on doing this, is like, she was always like, no matter what, we don't miss family dinner. So family dinner is like incredibly important. And I think I can count each year on one hand how many times I've missed it because of some event or whatever, but it's on one hand in terms of it. So we're always together. And as chaotic as that is, you can imagine a family of 8 with so many small kids. There's way too many stories on that. It's great. It's rewarding because all those, you get to kind of find out what's happening in their life, what's going on, what are they kind of working on at the moment, what are their kind of worries, concerns, and you just kind of get to address them in a very kind of open scenario. So for us, that's really kind of big, doing things together. And the other thing is also about kind of realizing, as hard as it is, you do need to kind of also dedicate some time to yourself as well, and find something, some kind of avenue for you to de-stress from as well. And for different people, it's different things. For me, it's kind of like, it might be training or boxing or something like that. But that's my kind of avenue where I can just turn off and kind of, when I go into that room, finish stuff and come back, and I kind of reset as a human being. So you need to kind of, consider all the kind of elements. And I think, again, comes down to being an entrepreneur. You're constantly juggling things and spinning multiple plates, and that's just one of them as well.
Yeah. Love that. Damir, once again, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure. If anyone wants to find out more, say hello, get in touch, what's the best way for them to do that?
Pretty active on LinkedIn, so feel free to kind of ping me on LinkedIn or follow me. I've been posting quite a few controversial things these days. So, jump on and reach out that way.
Amazing. I will make sure those links are in the show notes. Damir, once again, thanks so much for coming on the show. It's been awesome having you on.
Pleasure. Thank you, Robert.
Thanks for listening to episode 205 of the Startup Playbook podcast. As always, full show notes from this episode will be available at startupplaybook.co. I'll be back next week with another episode, but in the meantime, if you enjoyed this interview, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. As always, thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next week.